In the architecture of relationships, authenticity is the cornerstone. Without it, everything that is built will eventually crumble under the weight of pretense. Yet, so often, men, especially those who long to be seen, to be needed, to be wanted, find themselves compromising the very parts of themselves that make them whole. Why? Because somewhere along the way, they've internalized a dangerous belief that in order to be loved, they must not disrupt, they must not challenge, they must not fully be themselves. It often begins subtly. A man meets someone who excites him, who evokes desire and admiration. There's a certain thrill in the early connection, a curiosity, a tenderness. But then something else creeps in, something quieter and more insidious, the fear of loss. That fear whispers, "Don't say that, it might upset her. Don't disagree, she might pull away. Don't reveal too much, she might think you're too intense." And so he begins to shift, not in grand gestures, but in tiny moments. He laughs at things that don't move him. He nods in conversations where his truth would offer something else. He swallows discomfort, avoids conflict, and calls it peace. This kind of self-betrayal isn't always obvious. In fact, it can look like harmony. It can even feel like love. But what's actually happening is a silent negotiation of the self. A man who does this trades authenticity for approval. He becomes a version of himself that is easier to digest, more agreeable, less threatening. And over time, this curated persona becomes the one that shows up in the relationship. Not the real man, just the performative one. But the cost of this performance is high. He may keep the relationship afloat, but he loses connection to his own voice, to his own needs, to his emotional landscape. Intimacy becomes an act instead of a meeting. Desire fades, not because the relationship lacks chemistry, but because the man no longer recognizes himself inside it. And when you lose your sense of self, the relationship becomes a mirror, reflecting only what you think the other wants to see. There is no depth in that kind of reflection, only distortion. Authenticity isn't about being unapologetically raw at all times. It's not about demanding acceptance for every unfiltered thought. It's about being rooted in your truth while remaining open to another's. It means expressing disagreement, not with hostility, but with respect. It means saying, "That doesn't work for me," even if it risks disapproval. It means staying aligned with your internal compass, even when external validation tempts you to drift. Smart men learn to discern the difference between compromise and self-abandonment. A healthy relationship will always require negotiation, but not at the cost of your identity. Compromise says, "We can find a middle ground." Self-abandonment says, "I will leave myself entirely if it means you'll stay." One strengthens the bond, the other corrodes it quietly. And there is something profoundly magnetic about a man who knows who he is, who doesn't apologize for his depth, his passion, or his vulnerability. A man who can say no without aggression, who can reveal uncertainty without shame, who can express emotional truths without outsourcing his worth to someone else's approval. That kind of authenticity invites genuine connection, not performative attachment. There's also a deeper psychological dimension at play. Many men are conditioned from an early age to equate emotional invisibility with relational success, to be the one who provides, who protects, who listens, but never the one who disrupts the emotional current with his own needs. He becomes fluent in accommodating others, but illiterate in expressing himself. And so, when he enters intimate relationships, he brings that pattern with him. But over time, this disconnection from self breeds resentment. He may not express it, but he feels it. He may not understand it, but it shows up in his withdrawal, in his sudden silence, in the numbing of his desire. What often follows is a slow unraveling. The woman may sense that something's missing. She may say, "I don't feel like I really know you." And she's right, because even he has lost track of himself. The relationship, once full of potential, begins to hollow, not because love has died, but because the performance became unbearable. Authenticity is not just an emotional preference, it's a relational necessity. If you cannot be seen as you truly are, then you are not loved, you are simply tolerated. If you cannot express what you feel, then the relationship becomes a space where only one truth is allowed to breathe. And no connection can flourish in the absence of mutual truth. When men abandon their authenticity in exchange for approval, they do not create harmony. They create a silent prison with invisible bars. In relationships, the invisible weight is often the heaviest. It's not the grand gestures or the shared milestones that strain intimacy. It's the ongoing, quiet assumption that one partner will carry the emotional architecture of the relationship alone. And too often, that partner is the woman. Emotional labor, the work of anticipating needs, managing feelings, maintaining harmony, initiating conversations, holding space, offering reassurance, has been quietly feminized. Many men have been conditioned to see this emotional scaffolding not as their responsibility, but as something women simply do better. Not because women are inherently more equipped, but because society has allowed men to remain emotionally peripheral while expecting women to be relational experts. What happens when a man steps back and leaves the emotional terrain to his partner? He may not realize it in the moment, but he's creating an imbalance that undermines trust and partnership. He becomes a guest in the emotional life of the relationship rather than a co-creator. He waits for her to bring things up. He relies on her to identify problems, to navigate conflict, to translate his feelings when he himself cannot or will not articulate them. And at first, it may seem to function. She talks, he listens. She initiates, he responds. She cries, he comforts. But beneath this rhythm is an unspoken inequality. She is doing the work of two, and she feels it. Over time, even if she doesn't voice it, she begins to carry the fatigue of being the emotional anchor without reciprocation. She may feel unsupported even in his presence. She may feel alone even when he is physically beside her, because emotional absence is not the same as neutrality. It is a form of disconnection that slowly depletes the vitality of the bond. When one person is always attuning and the other is always being attuned to, resentment grows in silence. Smart men recognize that emotional labor is not beneath them, it is integral to intimacy. They understand that emotional intelligence isn't something you either have or don't. It's a capacity that is cultivated one conversation at a time. It means noticing not just what is said, but what is unsaid. It means checking in, not just when there is a visible issue, but as a daily act of relational presence. It means offering reassurance without being asked, acknowledging shifts in mood without requiring her to explain herself, and holding emotional complexity without needing to fix it. The refusal to engage emotionally is not stoicism. It is avoidance. And avoidance is often rooted in fear, fear of vulnerability, fear of inadequacy, fear of being overwhelmed. Many men have grown up in environments where emotions were either ignored, shamed, or ridiculed. They were taught that to feel is to be weak, that to express is to be unstable, that to empathize is to relinquish power. And so, when they enter intimate relationships, they bring with them a toolkit of detachment, withdrawal, and silent endurance. But those tools do not build intimacy, they build distance. The truth is, emotional labor is not a burden, it is a relational offering. When done reciprocally, it creates safety, it creates trust, it allows both partners to feel held. A relationship where emotional labor is shared is a relationship where both people can exhale. And this kind of connection is not just sustaining, it is enlivening. It feeds the bond, not drains it. Yet some men misunderstand what emotional engagement looks like. They imagine it requires dramatic confessions or constant vulnerability. But it's often much simpler and far more powerful. It's asking, "How are you really doing today?" and listening without judgment. It's noticing when she seems distant and saying, "I sense something's off. Do you want to talk about it?" It's recognizing your own defensiveness and saying, "I hear you. That wasn't easy for me to take in, but I appreciate you telling me." These are not grand declarations. They are small acts of presence that create emotional equity. When men disengage emotionally, they don't just deprive their partner, they deprive themselves. They miss the opportunity to grow, to deepen, to truly be known. Because emotional labor is not just about tending to the other. It's about revealing yourself. And In doing so, you allow your partner to meet the real you, not the emotionally distant projection of you. That kind of mutual visibility is what makes relationships resilient. It is what transforms love from a feeling into a living, breathing practice. Women are not born with emotional fluency. They learn it, often because they have to. But men can learn it too. It begins with curiosity, humility, and the willingness to sit with discomfort. It begins when a man decides that connection is more important than control, that presence is more valuable than pride, and that being emotionally responsible is not a chore, but a choice toward deeper love. Love and control are often mistaken for one another, but they are not the same. In fact, they stand on opposite sides of the emotional spectrum. One is grounded in freedom, trust, and mutual respect. The other is fueled by fear, insecurity, and the illusion of safety. Many men, without fully realizing it, attempt to create closeness through control. They believe that if they can shape their partner's behavior, monitor her actions, influence her decisions, or manage the emotional climate of the relationship, they will feel more secure, more connected, more in charge of their relational destiny. But what they are really doing is suffocating the very conditions that allow intimacy to breathe. Control rarely announces itself boldly. It arrives wrapped in care, in concern, in protective instincts. It sounds like, "I just want what's best for you," or "I'm only trying to help," or "I need to know where you are because I worry." These statements might be sincere, but when they mask a need to dominate or dictate, they stop being loving. The line between concern and control is drawn not by intent, but by impact. When a partner feels surveilled, managed, or manipulated, even under the guise of love, the relational dynamic shifts from connection to coercion. Smart men understand that true connection is not about possession. It's not about knowing everything, controlling the pace of every interaction, or deciding how their partner should show up in the world. True connection requires a willingness to surrender the fantasy of control in exchange for the reality of intimacy. That means accepting that you cannot protect your partner from every risk. You cannot prevent every misunderstanding. And you cannot engineer every emotional outcome. What you can do is choose to meet her with openness, with presence, and with the kind of trust that allows her to be fully herself. Often, control is a response to internal chaos. When a man does not feel safe within himself, when he is afraid of loss, rejection, betrayal, he looks outward for a place to channel that anxiety. The relationship becomes the site where he seeks order, predictability, certainty. He may begin to comment on her clothing, her friends, her time, her words, not necessarily out of cruelty, but out of a deep need to stabilize what he fears he cannot hold. This is not love. This is fear wearing the mask of intimacy. And yet, in his attempt to manage her, he loses her. Not always physically, but emotionally, because control kills curiosity. It tells the partner, I already know what's right for you. It doesn't ask questions, it gives directives. It doesn't invite growth, it demands compliance. And no one, man or woman, thrives under emotional dictatorship. What might begin as romantic protection soon becomes emotional policing. The space that should foster freedom becomes a closed system, monitored and measured, with little room for spontaneity, desire, or individuality. Men who confuse control with connection often struggle with emotional ambiguity. They want clear definitions, sharp roles, predictable behavior. But relationships are not algorithms. They are organisms. They breathe, shift, surprise. They require a tolerance for the unknown, for emotional complexity, for mutual imperfection. When a man insists on control, he reveals an unwillingness to engage with the unpredictable nature of human intimacy. He prefers power over partnership, certainty over discovery. But there is another path, a smarter, braver one. It's the path of allowing. Allowing her to feel what she feels without trying to edit or fix it. Allowing her to disagree without making it a threat. Allowing her to choose her life, her expression, her relationships, not because you are indifferent, but because you respect her autonomy as deeply as you value your own. This kind of allowing is not passive. It is active trust. It requires emotional maturity, a grounded sense of self, and the capacity to hold space for someone without needing to shape them. And this shift from control to connection begins within. A man must ask himself what he is truly afraid of. Is it abandonment? Is it inadequacy? Is it being seen in his full emotional nakedness and not being chosen? These fears are human. But when left unexamined, they become the drivers of controlling behavior. When confronted with compassion, they become the doorway to deeper self-awareness. And only from that awareness can a man begin to choose connection over control, not just with his partner, but with himself. A relationship built on control will always feel fragile. It will depend on compliance, secrecy, and performance. But a relationship built on connection can weather conflict, change, and vulnerability, because it's rooted in truth, not power. It doesn't require one partner to shrink so the other can feel tall. It allows both to stand fully in their truth, side by side. Communication is not just the exchange of words, it is the transmission of presence. It is the willingness to let another person into your internal world, to say, this is what I see, this is how I feel, this is what I fear, and this is what I hope. But many men, especially those who have been taught to equate silence with strength, fall into the trap of withholding. They use silence not as space for reflection, but as a strategy, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously, to control the emotional atmosphere of a relationship. They stop speaking when they feel threatened. They withdraw affection when conflict arises. They vanish into themselves when emotions become too big, too unpredictable, too vulnerable. And in doing so, they mistake emotional absence for composure and control for clarity. Withholding communication is one of the most subtle and corrosive forms of relational power play. It doesn't scream. It doesn't argue. It doesn't slam doors. It simply retreats. It leaves the partner grasping in the dark for meaning, wondering what went wrong, questioning their own perception. Silence, when used in this way, becomes a form of punishment. It says, "Until you behave the way I want you to, I will deprive you of connection." And when a man engages in this behavior, he is not protecting the relationship. He is destabilizing it by creating a dynamic where love is conditional and approval must be earned. The silence may look like self-control on the outside, but inside it is often a swirling storm of fear, resentment, or shame. Many men haven't been given the tools or permission to articulate these inner states. So instead of saying, "I feel hurt," they say nothing. Instead of saying, "I don't know how to express this," they withdraw. Instead of admitting vulnerability, they armor themselves in distance. They wait. They hope the situation will resolve on its own, or that their partner will read between the lines, or that time will dissolve the tension. But what they don't realize is that every moment of silence becomes a message. And the message is, "You don't deserve to know what I feel. You don't get access to me unless I choose to make myself available." When this pattern continues, the relationship begins to revolve around one person's emotional temperature. The partner learns to tiptoe, to monitor, to anticipate the next withdrawal. This dynamic is not connection. It is containment. It trains the other person to suppress their truth in order to maintain closeness. And that's not intimacy, that's survival. It's a performance staged in the name of peace, but at the cost of authenticity. Smart men understand that communication is not always about having the perfect words. It's about showing up. It's about staying in the room when things get uncomfortable. It's about saying, "I'm not sure how to talk about this, but I want to try." Communication is messy, imperfect, and deeply human. It's not about being eloquent. It's about being honest. And honesty requires the willingness to be seen in your uncertainty, to risk misunderstanding, to endure discomfort for the sake of connection. There is a certain illusion that withholding maintains power. It's seductive because it offers temporary relief. You don't have to deal with confrontation. You don't have to feel exposed. You don't have to risk being wrong. But this illusion comes with a high cost. When a man withholds, he also loses access to empathy, to closeness, to repair. He may protect his ego, but he sacrifices the relationship. He chooses safety over intimacy, distance over dialogue. What's required is a shift in understanding. Communication isn't weakness, it's responsibility. When a man speaks with intention, even when he is afraid, he affirms his presence in the relationship. He says, I am willing to meet you, even when it's hard. This willingness becomes a foundation of trust because it tells the partner, you are not alone in this. I won't abandon you in silence. I won't make you do the work of guessing and decoding. I will bring myself to the table, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's difficult. To communicate is to allow love to be dynamic. It's the act of making the invisible visible. Thoughts become shared. Feelings become known. Conflict becomes an invitation to understand, not a reason to disappear. In this space, relationships mature. They deepen. They evolve. Because both people are participating. Both are risking. Both are choosing presence over power. Men must unlearn the myth that silence is strength. Real strength is emotional transparency. It's having the courage to say, I'm scared, or I don't know how to do this, or what you said hurt me, and I'm still figuring out why. These are the statements that invite healing. These are the doorways to connection. Without them, the relationship becomes a house of locked rooms, quiet, tidy, and completely alone. There is a common misinterpretation of emotional presence, especially among men who are earnestly trying to show up for their partners. Somewhere along the way, the idea of being there was reduced to a kind of quiet, non-interfering, background support, a passive stance, marked more by physical proximity than emotional engagement. But true presence is not simply about being in the same room. It's not about nodding during a conversation or saying, I understand, when you don't, or sitting quietly through your partner's emotions, hoping they resolve themselves. Presence is not passive. It is active, attuned, and deeply relational. It requires a man not just to witness, but to participate, fully, vulnerably, and without retreat. For many men, the invitation to be emotionally present is disorienting. They may ask, isn't it enough that I'm here? That I didn't walk away? That I'm listening? And yes, these things matter. But presence goes beyond endurance. It's not about being a silent wall that absorbs emotion. It's about being a responsive partner who listens with empathy, who reflects with depth, who offers their emotional body as a space of safety, not just stillness. It's about being emotionally available, not just physically available. When a man defaults to passivity, he creates an emotional void. His partner may be speaking, feeling, unraveling, and yet feel deeply alone. Not because he isn't there, but because he isn't reachable. He becomes a silent figure, hard to read, difficult to access. And over time, that silence can be louder than any words. It says, I am here, but not with you. It communicates disengagement, confusion, or apathy. even when the intention was to provide calm and support. In his attempt to be non-intrusive, the man becomes emotionally invisible. Presence, when embodied consciously, means engagement. It means noticing the tremble in your partner's voice and asking gently, "What's behind that?" It means recognizing that when she says, "I'm fine," with a half smile, she might actually be saying, "I don't feel seen right now." Presence means tuning in without the need to fix, holding space without disappearing, and offering insight without dominating the conversation. It's not passive listening, it's relational participation. There is a fear among many men that emotional engagement will lead them into territory they're unprepared for. Perhaps they worry that if they dig deeper, they'll be exposed as inadequate, or that they'll be asked to feel something they've spent years trying not to feel, or that their own emotional needs will surface in ways they can't yet name. And so they opt for neutrality. They call it steadiness, but it's really detachment. They fear the vulnerability of true connection, and so they stay on the shoreline, watching the emotional waves crash without ever stepping in. But true presence means being willing to get wet. It's about standing in the emotional currents with your partner, not trying to redirect them or avoid them, but learning to move with them. It's about saying, "I'm here not as a spectator, but as a partner in this experience." Presence doesn't require perfection. It doesn't mean having all the answers. It simply requires availability, emotional, psychological, and energetic. This kind of engagement also involves the courage to reveal. Many men are conditioned to believe that they must be the stable one, the rational one, the anchor. And while grounding energy is important, it's not the same as suppression. When a man mistakes emotional suppression for strength, he becomes impenetrable. But real strength is flexible. It bends with honesty. It breathes. A man who is truly present is also transparent. He says, "This is what I'm feeling too." He allows himself to be seen, even in his uncertainty. That mutual vulnerability becomes a bridge, not just toward understanding, but toward real intimacy. Passive presence, though well-intentioned, often leads to emotional disconnection. It creates a relational imbalance where one partner is emotionally expressive and the other is emotionally reserved. The expressive partner begins to feel like they're dancing alone, trying to keep the rhythm of the relationship alive while the other merely observes. And eventually, this dynamic exhausts the one doing all the emotional labor. She begins to feel not just unsupported, but emotionally orphaned inside the relationship. Men who choose active presence bring life into the emotional ecosystem of their partnership. They ask questions. They stay curious. They challenge themselves to show up, even when they don't have the language yet. They practice emotional fluency, not by getting it right every time, but by showing up every time. Presence is not about silence. It's about resonance. It's about attunement. It's about standing in the middle of relational complexity and saying, I'm with you. Not just beside you, but with you. A man who embodies this kind of presence doesn't disappear when it gets hard. He stays not as a statue, but as a living, breathing emotional partner willing to create the experience of love, even when the path is unclear. In the landscape of modern relationships, smart men are not those who dominate, retreat, or perform. They are the ones who choose to evolve. They recognize that strength is not found in control, silence, passivity, or self-abandonment, but in the courage to remain emotionally present, deeply authentic, and fully engaged. These men unlearn the outdated scripts of stoicism, detachment, and entitlement, and instead step into the vulnerable, dynamic, and often uncomfortable truth of intimacy. They stop treating emotional labor as optional. They stop withholding their voice to wield power. They stop shrinking themselves for acceptance. And in doing so, they stop mistaking control for love or presence for passivity. What they create instead is a relationship rooted in mutual respect, shared responsibility, and honest connection. A space where both partners feel seen, heard, and deeply held. It is not perfection they pursue, but wholeness. Not performance, but presence. Not dominance, but reciprocity. This is what it means to be relationally intelligent. This is what it means to be emotionally awake. This is what it means to truly love.